It has to do with regulation. Many people have become convinced through specious argumentation that the financial crisis of 2007 to well about now was caused by deregulation, and therefore regulation is the answer. This is completely wrong, despite the fact that most people I meet believe it. In reality, the financial crisis was caused by regulation. Bad, overcomplex regulation. And I want to emphasize this point because it's vital that we understand that the crisis occurred in the most regulated parts of the financial system, not in the unregulated parts. Banks on both sides of the Atlantic were highly regulated, both at the national and at the international level. Government-sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which underwrote the mortgage market in the United States, which was the epicenter of the crisis, were highly regulated institutions under the direct supervision of the US Congress. Hedge funds did not cause the financial crisis. The financial crisis was caused by the fact that the regulations did not work, and the regulators were either bought or were asleep. Until we recognize that regulation is the disease of which it purports to be the cure, to paraphrase Karl Kraus's famous critique of psychoanalysis, we will keep making the same mistake. What has happened since the crisis? More regulation. The Dodd-Frank bill, Basel III. Did you know that Basel III is more than an order of magnitude larger in page numbers than Basel I? Do you think it will be an order of magnitude more effective? Me neither. The Dodd-Frank bill covers nearly 1,000 pages, not including all the regulations that it has since spawned. Do you think it will make another financial crisis not happen? Me neither. The growth of complex regulation is one of the pathologies of the modern West. Let me illustrate the point with a simple measure. If you exclude the blank pages, the Federal Register, which is a compendium of all regulations in the United States, federal regulations, covers 78,961 pages. Well, back in 1936, it was just 2,620. Well, you say to me, of course, the economy's grown enormously since then. There must need to be more regulation. Don't be stupid. You're quite right. The US economy is 12 times larger today than it was in 1936, allowing for inflation. But guess what? The Federal Register is 30 times larger. Regulation breeds. There are 63 different government agencies, departments, commissions, you name it, whose raison d'etre is to produce regulation in the United States alone. There has only been one period since the war when regulation shrank in the United States, when the Federal Register actually got shorter, and that was in the presidency of Ronald Reagan, when it shrank by 30%. In all other periods, in every other presidency since Harry Truman, the volume of regulation has grown. Democrat, Republican, makes no difference. This is a phenomenon we encounter everywhere in the Western world, the pathology of complex regulation. It's related to the belief that if every single contingency is covered by a regulation, then your ass is covered too. But this has an unintended consequence. It's expensive. Regulation costs the US economy today $1.8 trillion a year. That's on the basis of the government's own figures. That's equivalent to an invisible surcharge on all federal taxes of 35%. It's close to 12% of GDP, and guess what? It weighs more heavily on small business than on large business. Per employee, it's 36% more expensive if you employ 20 people or fewer than if you employ 500 people or more. Does anybody here run a business? 2, me, 4. Okay. Don't be ashamed. I'm actually quite proud of it. So I don't know how it is in Norway, but the biggest problem of running a business in the United States is the regulation nation. And this problem is one of the reasons that it is becoming harder to do business in many Western countries, at a time when it's getting easier to do it in non-Western countries. Let me illustrate the point. The World Bank produces 7 different measures that relate to the ease of doing business that are measured in terms of days. Number of days it takes you to start a business. Suppose you decide to start a business. I don't know how many days it takes in Norway to start a business, but you could find out. So if you take the 7 different things that the World Bank measures in days, start a business, get an import license, recover a debt that some bugger hasn't repaid you, add those things together, and you have a pretty handy index for how easy it is to do business. Well, in 2006, it would have taken you 368 days to do all 7 things sequentially in the United States. But today, it's 433 days. It's gone up by 18% in that short space of time. There are only 21 countries in the world where it has got harder to do business by this measure. The United States is one of them. So is Burundi, so is Yemen. Ease of doing business is a good measure of the cost of regulation. And in the United States, we haven't even hit Obamacare. That's next year's treat in store. The other thing that really drives you crazy if you're running a small business in the United States is lawyers. Are there any lawyers here? Okay. You're not going to like this bit at all. In fact, it applies more to the US than to Europe. In the US, the legal profession is out of control. It is a rent-seeking elite that extracts its rents in a variety of ways. It doesn't even need super complex regulation to do it. It can do it just fine through the tort system. If you were an American audience, I would now tell you at great length about the egregious abuse of the tort system. Since you're a Norwegian audience, I will spare you. Suffice to say that if you look at the 22 different measures of institutional quality that the World Economic Forum puts together when it's constructing its competitiveness index, these are everything from investor protection through intellectual property rights to criminality, all of that stuff. It's amazing how badly the United States fares in international comparison. Hong Kong beats the US on 22 out of 22 counts. In most categories, the US isn't even in the world's top 30.